the King James Version, the New King James Version, the Living Bible, the New International Version, the New American Standard Version, the Common English Version, the Good News Translation, and on and on and on. With so many different English translations available, how is one supposed to know which one to choose? Is there a best version? Maybe good, better, and best? Or perhaps the good, the bad, and the ugly? Probably not. Hi, my name is Jeremy Fulton, and let's talk about how to choose a Bible translation. But first, let's answer two questions. Why do we need to translate the Bible, and what is a translation? So why do we need to translate the Bible? It might seem like an obvious answer, but just to make sure we're on the same page, I'm going to start here anyways. The Bible was written in ancient Greek and Hebrew, languages which I don't speak today, and you probably don't either. And even if you are a native speaker of modern Greek or Hebrew, the language has changed so much over the years that you would still need to translate it because it's so much different. Simply put, to be able to read and understand the Bible, I need it put into a language that I can understand. So, what is a translation? A translation is taking the text from one language and reproducing its meaning into another language. You might be tempted to think that all that is involved is translating the particular Greek or Hebrew word into the modern English literal equivalent. If only it were that simple. In many languages, some words have multiple meanings, unrelated meanings, depending on how it's used, in context. Think of the word key. How many different meanings are there? Key to a lock, the Florida Keys, the key point to a speech, just to name a few. In Spanish, for example, each English meaning would have a different Spanish word. You have to look at how it's used, look at its context to know exactly what it means. Now let's take idioms. In English, we say, it's a small world. The Spanish equivalent is, the world is a handkerchief, el mundo es un pañuelo. The biblical authors used many idioms when they wrote, and when they translate directly to English, the meaning is usually lost. If I were to say to you, the world is a handkerchief, I'm sure we get a confused look. Because of the various understandings of words and phrases, there are many translations to choose from. This morning I looked at the Bible app and it has 72 options. 72! That can make it so hard to choose a translation. It might even seem overwhelming. Nowadays, with access to so many different translations, we can't just walk into a Christian bookstore and pick the design cover that we like. It's important to understand the differences in the translations so that we make the best decision possible. Now, before I get into any guidance on how to pick a particular translation, let's look at how they're different. Remember, the goal of a translation is to reproduce the meaning of the text. When we work at the word meaning in context, it has a range of how it can be used. On one end of the spectrum is the formal equivalent translation, which is as close to a word for word as possible. The translators do their best to reproduce as much original language in English without changing meanings. Idioms are converted, usually word for word, and much of the original sentence structure is retained. On the other end of the spectrum is the functional equivalent, or meaning for meaning. The intent is to translate and capture the meaning of the original text in modern English, how I would use it today. Idioms are translated into words that they weren't originally used so that I can understand it. Remember, it's a small world. Now, each type of translation has its strengths. Former translations are helpful in identifying the structure of the original text, including repeated words and verbal allusions, and reproducing the Greek and Hebrew text as it was written. An example of a formal equivalent would be the NASB, or New American Standard Bible. Functional translations excel at communicating meaning of the text accurately, with clarity and natural sounding language. An example of a functional equivalent is the Good News Translation. Most translations fall along a spectrum between the extremes. Most are somewhere in the middle. And this graphic shows some of the more popular translations and where they fall. Now that brings us to the whole point of this video. How do I choose one from the over 72 different English translations? It depends. Don't you just love that answer? Well, I say that because it depends on how you're going to use the Bible. Are you just reading a passage during your quiet time in the morning before the kids get up? Are you preaching from the pulpit every Sunday morning and Wednesday night? Or are you digging in and doing an in-depth word study on a certain word or passage? The answer to these questions will help you choose. But here are my recommendations. If you are reading just to be in the Word, such as your morning quiet time, I usually read from a more functional translation, such as a New Living. Now, if I'm choosing a translation to speak a message on a Sunday morning or to another group, I'm probably going to pick the NIV, which is more of a midstream translation. It allows me to pull from the strengths of each one. Now, for serious study, I recommend looking at multiple translations, not just one. I would recommend definitely pulling from a more formal translation, such as the NASB. In all cases, it's important to get multiple takes on the original text. Now, if you are like me, you are not a scholar of biblical languages and can't just read the ancient text and understand it. It's important to look at passages in different translations and see all the ways that it could be understood from all the different philosophies. Because each team that translates the Bible comes from a different viewpoint and has a different philosophy of what they're trying to accomplish. And if you are looking at multiple different translations, you can get a fuller understanding of the passage. Now, one last piece of advice from a mentor of mine. If you read through the Bible on an annual plan, for example, and read through it frequently, I recommend picking a different translation, or he recommended to me to pick a different translation every time. And then you can get a more thorough understanding of the Bible as a whole and get a better understanding of how the different translations work in day to day. Now, I hope this short video helps you to understand why we have different translations and help you understand how to use and to choose one. Thank you.